Welcome back, everyone, to a new Sefer Bamidabar. We begin this week, and I don't know, a new round or new thoughts on the Ramban. The Ramban, as we've seen before, obsessed is the wrong word, but is very, very focused on the chronology of the Torah, and that continues in Sefer Bamidabar. It happens to raise certain challenges to the Ramban's general theme of Yesh Mukdama Mukhar B'Torah. Last year we did the Hakdama. I'm not going to repeat it now, but the Ramban there focuses on a certain word in the beginning of this week's parsha. Vayidaber Hashem al Moshe b'midbar Sinai be'ohel moed be'echad lachodesh hasheni b'hashana hashenit litzeitam me'eretz Mitzrayim lemor. The Ramban wants to know what's so important about be'ohel moed. And this goes back to a number of things we've seen before. Let's do the first Ramban in Sefer Bamidbar, not the Hakdama, but his introduction to the first pasuk. Says the Ramban. Ba'avur shehifsik b'mitzvat hashmita v'hayovel shamru shahayu b'har Sinai. The Ramban says, okay, the Torah took a break from the overall theme of Sefer Vayikra in order to include the halachas of Shemitah and Yovel, and we can add to that the Arachin at the end of Parshas Bechukosai and the Tochacha, and that was Bahar Sinai. That was the introduction, the first pasuk of Parshas Bahar. Moshe Bahar Sinai lemor. So he says, therefore, Chazar v'amar kan shehaya hadibur hazeh b'Ohel Moed. So the Torah had to tell us now that Parshas Bamidbar, the continuing conversation about Kadosh Baruch Hu with Moshe Rabbeinu, was not in Har Sinai, but it was b'Ohel Moed. Kechol hadibrot asher hizkir mitchilat Sefer Vayikra. Like all right, Sefer Vayikra starts. Vayikra Hashem al Moshe. Sorry, I should know this by heart. Sefer Vayikra starts. Vayikra el Moshe, Vayidaber Hashem elav me'ohel moed lemor. So the Ramban is saying, we're going back to continue that chronology. Okay? So Moshe, God only spoke to Moshe Rabbeinu from Ohel Moed. V'chein yu kulam mikan ve'elach b'Ohel Moed. Ki me'et shehukam hamishkan vayikra elav Hashem me'Ohel Moed lo nidaber lo ela misham. That's a very important rule. Says the Ramban. From the time that we built the Mishkan, every time God speaks to Moshe Rabbeinu, it's me'Ohel Moed. It's from the tent of the meeting. It's from the Kodesh, it's from the Kodesh HaKadashim. Only from there. V'hizkir kan b'midbar Sinai lehagid shelo nasu misham ad shenimnu, to remind us that they were in Midbar Sinai, they didn't travel from Midbar Sinai until the count. Ki haminyan hasheni haya ba'arvot moav v'hadibur b'Ohel Moed. Because the second count was already in Arvot Moav, literally, when we're about to go into Eretz Yisrael. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu is still talking to Moshe from Ohel Moed. Now, why is this so important to the Ramban? So it strikes me that, first of all, he just wants to make it clear what's happening in the Torah and what's happening in the chronology, and that there is a flow to the Parshiot. But I think there's something more. The Ramban, in his Hakdama to Sefer Bamidbar, says, I'll just read the first line, Achar shebiyer Torah HaKarbonot b'Sefer HaShlishi, after the theme of the Karbonot in Sefer Vayikra, Hitchilat l'sader b'Sefer Azeh HaMitzvot shenitztavu b'inyan Ohel Moed. Right? It's not just the place. It strikes me that the Ramban is saying there's something much more significant about Ohel Moed. And here, what I think is as follows. The Ramban has told us before, and I think we've discussed before, the idea that Har Sinai became a Gilui Shechina B'ma'at. It is actually a copy, the opposite. The Mishkan is a copy of Har Sinai. Har Sinai was a Gilui Shechina of the type that the world has never seen before or again. Then, because of the need that Gilui Shechina created among Am Yisrael, because we actually felt God's presence, because we saw God's presence, because we all of a sudden had like a physical need for a representation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and let's be honest, in a way that makes us uncomfortable, bizman hazeh, but again, I think it makes us uncomfortable because we never had the experience. So once you had the experience of Har Sinai, Says the Ramban, HaKadosh Baruch Hu then said, Lechatchila, having nothing to do with the sin of the Egel, you need to build a continuation. You need to build a portable Har Sinai. You need to build an Ohel Moed that I can speak to Moshe Rabbeinu from, just like I spoke to Moshe Rabbeinu at the top of Har Sinai. It's literally the parallel. And the Ramban mentions there in the end of Sefer Shmos, the fire of the Mishkan, of the gold of the Kalim, sort of mimicking the fire at the top of Har Sinai, and the cloud being made by the Torah, much like the cloud at the top of Har Sinai. It's a complete parallel. And the Ramban says, or wants us to know, that when God speaks to Moshe, he speaks to Moshe from Har Sinai. But they're not at Har Sinai anymore. So the answer is no. He speaks from Ohel Moed, which is the replacement for, which is the copy of. Yes, not an absolute, actual Gilui Shechina of the type of Har Sinai, but a Gilui Shechina b'ma'at. And that is emphasized over and over again, says the Ramban in the Torah, from the Torah saying, Vayidvar Hashem el Moshe, me Ohel Moed lemor. Just like me Har Sinai lemor, me Ohel Moed lemor. That exact Gilui Shechina that took place at Har Sinai is continuing now exactly as HaKadosh Baruch Hu had planned through the Mishkan. Yes, it's true that Chet Egel came in between, and maybe it affected our relationship with God, and maybe it affected our relationship with the Mishkan, but ultimately, the Mishkan was always going to be there. The Mishkan was commanded, according to Ramban, before Chet HaEgel. Therefore, the Torah keeps reminding us that God spoke to Moshe, Ohel Moed, meaning from the Mishkan, as was the plan originally. Okay, I think that's a really, really, really interesting point, even if, it's not something that we notice all the time. Now, let's go on. The major theme of the beginning of the Parsha, maybe of the entire Parsha, is counting Bnei Yisrael. So let's go towards the end of the first parak. The pasuk says as follows. Pasuk Mem Hey. We'll read it. Eila hapkudim asher pagad Moshe v'Aaron u'nisiyei Yisrael shnei masar ish echad leveit avotav hayu. This is the count. Vayihiyu kol pikudei b'nei Yisrael leveit avotam miben esrim shana v'mala kol yotzei tzava b'Yisrael. And how much are they? There's 603,550. And the Ramban is sort of bothered, and it's something that should really bother all of us. It's a very common sense question, which is, HaKadosh Baruch Hu's made it clear a number of times in the Torah that he doesn't want Bnei Yisrael counted. Right? Ki tisad rosh Bnei Yisrael v'kudehem v'natnu ish kof nafsho bivkodotam v'lo yihiyeh bohem negef bivkodotam. There's something dangerous about counting Bnei Yisrael. So the Ramban basically wants to know, if there's something so dangerous about it, so why does God do it? Why does God make us, do the math? Okay, every shevet was this 100,000 and this 50,000 and that 20, and then we have to add them up, and then we need a pasuk that's going to say, Vayu kol hapikudim sheish meot elef u'shloshet alafim v'chamesh meot v'chamishim. Why? So says the Ramban, right there, pasuk Mem Hey. Hutzrach hakatuv lahagid mispar haklal la'achar she'yigid hapratim. Yes, we need to know how much each shevet is, and then we need to add all those things up. Ki nitztaveh Moshe v'Aharon sheyedu mispar mifkad ha'am v'yedu mispar kol shevet. Moshe and Aaron were given a mitzvah to know to ascertain how many Jews are in each shevet and how many Jews in total. Why? So says the Ramban, Ki chen derech hamelachim bimnotam et ha'am. That's how kings do it. And he's sort of subtly making the point that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the Melech Malchei HaMelachim, but he's still a king. And he still feels good when he counts his people. But now's the question. V'lo havinoti tam hamitzvah zot. But why? Lama tziva ba'HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Why would God want them to count? Ki hayat sorech sheyit yachasu l'shivtehem bavur adgalim. Let's say, says the Ramban, that we needed to know the exact number of the Shvatim because they're about to enter Eretz Yisrael. You have to remember, before the Chet HaMeraglim, it was a short journey from Har Sinai to Eretz Yisrael. The plan was, we're going in right now. We're not spending 40 years in the Midbar. So, okay, God, of course, knows how many is in each shevet, but the Ramban says Bnei Yisrael had to know so that they could know why this shevet got a bigger nachla and that shevet got a smaller nachla, even though, again, the Ramban thinks they all got the same nachalot. A little hard to figure that out. But he says, but even if that's true, aval yidiyat hamispar lo yadati lama tziva sheyedu oto. Why'd they have to do the math? They could have added it up themselves. I'm not good at math. I could do 12 numbers to get to 603,550. Why? That's the question of the Ramban. And he has a number of answers. First answer, 1. Ulai lahodiyam chasto alehem. God wants Bnei Yisrael to recognize how good He's been to us. Ki b'shivim nefesh yardu avoteinu mitzrayma. Yaakov Avinu went down to Mitzrayim with a family of 70. Va'atahem kechol hayam. And now they're so much bigger than that. You have to remember, the 603,550 number is only kol yotzei tzava b'Yisrael. It's people who are of the age that they're eligible to be in the army. It doesn't include children. It doesn't include old people. It doesn't include women. It's a big number. You know, the number I hear thrown around nowadays is 600,000, men between the ages of 20 and 60 is probably 2 million people. Okay? And it's not literally kechol hayam, like the sands of the beach, but okay. Okay, kach v'kach b'nei esrim. So that's the first thing. God is really proud, and He wants Bnei Yisrael to know how good He's been to them. Despite their sinning, God has taken them from 70 to 2 million. Next. Va'acharei kol dever u'magefa yimneim. After something terrible happens, after Korach, after Baal Peor, when God has to punish us, He immediately counts us. Lohodiyam kihu maski legoyim. He's showing the goyim, yes, I punish them, but I still protect them. Yimchatz v'yadav tirpena. On the one hand, God hurts us because He has to, but v'yadav tirapena, but those same hands are going to heal us. Yes, we're much fewer than we used to be after this particular sin, but He's taking care of us anyway. V'zeu shalmu rabotenu meirov chibatam moneh otam kol sha'a. Right? It's a sign of love. Yes, there's a danger involved in counting. There's yetzahar, there's ayin har, there's all kinds of bad things. But when God has the overwhelming desire to count us, it's to show us how much He loves us. Va'od. Next. This is really an amazing pshat, says the Ramban. Va'od. Ki haba lifnei av haniviim va'achiv kidosh Hashem. When a person comes and stands in front of Moshe Rabbeinu, the Adon HaNeviim, and in front of his brother, the chosen of God, Aaron HaKohen, V'hu noda aleihem bishmo. And part of the counting process, it's a ceremony. It's not just to get the result, right? That the father of the house doesn't say, okay, it's me, it's my wife, and it's 6 kids. No, everybody who is miben asrim shana v'mala has to appear in front of Moshe and Aaron. V'hu noda aleihem bishmo. And I stand in front of Moshe and I say, this is my name. My name is Eliezer Shalom ben Arav Mordechai. I tell him my name. Yihiyelo b'davar hazeh zchut v'chayim. You know what it's like? I mean this seriously. It's like if you're a person who goes to get brachos from a Rebbe. So you stand in front of the Rebbe, you give him your name, you give him your father's name, and he blesses you. You know, kal v'chomer ben benoshel kal v'chomer, to do that to Moshe and Aaron. Right? What an amazing moment. What a feeling of really being part of Klal Yisrael, of knowing that the number that's going to come out of this whole count includes you by name and your children by name. Kiva bisod ha'am. Such a person comes in the secret of the nation, ubichtav b'nei Yisrael, uzchut harabim b'misparam, and he has the great benefit of being part of all of Klal Yisrael and being counted individually. Right? One of the big problems with counting, Rav Amital Zatzal used to make this point all the time, is it dehumanizes you. You stop being an individual and you start being number 10,000 whatever. Right? He used to talk about communism that way. It takes away your individuality and it makes you just a number. The way to get around it is this. The way to get around it is to stand in front of Moshe and Aaron as an individual, as yourself, and relate to them. V'chein lechulam zchut b'mispar sheyimnu lifnei Moshe v'Aaron ki yasimu aleihem einam letova yivakshu aleihem rachamim. When people appear in front of Moshe and Aaron, they don't miss the opportunity to say, my cousin's not well, my friend is suffering. They get a bracha. They get Moshe and Aaron to daven for them. We don't normally think about it that way because we just don't think about it that way. But says the Ramban, that's exactly what happened. A, they're not just a number, they're individuals. B, they got an opportunity for a bracha. From the greatest human being who ever lived and the holiest human being who ever lived. And the Ramban continues, Hashem Elokei avotechem Yosef alechem kachem elef pamim. That's a bracha. V'lo yam'it misparchem, and he won't reduce your number. V'hashkalim kofer al nafshotechem, and when you give shkalim, it will serve as some kind of protection for your life. Okay, so that's an amazing thing. Now the Ramban goes on. U'b'midbar Sinai rabba ra'iti kach. I saw the following amazing medrash. B'mispar shemot legulgalotam. That's what the pasuk says. Amalo HaKadosh Baruch Hu limnotam b'chavod u'b'gidula. The exact opposite that you would expect from some impersonal census, where you're just a number. No. HaKadosh Baruch Hu commanded Moshe and Aaron to count each one individually by their greatness. L'chol echad v'echad. Lo tiyeh omer l'rosh ha'mishpacha kama mishpachtecha. They're not rushing. They're not saying, okay, how many in your family? Write it down, let's move on. Kama banim yesh lecha. Ela kulhon yahon ovrim lefanecha be'ema uvechavod. Imagine your excitement. Imagine being able to sleep the night before if you know you're going to meet Moshe and Aaron tomorrow. Right? So big people, we sometimes think, oh, they were hanging out with Moshe and Aaron all the time. But it's millions of people. So they get to do that. Va'atam oneotam. And when they appear in front of you, says God to Moshe, you will count them. Hado dichtiv b'mispar shemot. Again, it's a number and it's a name. It's a number because you need to figure out the number, but it's a name because you don't want to, commercialize. You don't want to make the people just a number. Right? Rav Amital used to mention the pasuk, Hamotzi b'mispar tziva'am lechulam shemot yikra. On the one hand, God takes out the stars by number. But that doesn't mean that they don't get the respect they deserve, because lechulam shemot yikra, because in addition to numbers, each one has his own name. Each one has his own identity. Mi ben asim shanavamal legulgalotam. V'yitachen shenomar od. Ki ayazeh kiderach shal malchut oseh b'vom lemilchama. Last point, says the Ramban. There may have been a need for the count. This ties into the Ramban's idea elsewhere, which is you cannot, the prohibition to count Bnei Yisrael is not just a technicality. It's a prohibition to count them without a need. David HaMelech sinned, says the Ramban, because he wasn't going to war. There was no need to count Bnei Yisrael. That's why he was punished. But if there is a need, ki ata hayu mizumanin li kanes la'aretz v'lavo b'milchamei malchei ha'amori asher be'ever ha'yarden v'im hashar kulam. As we mentioned before, says the Ramban, they're about to go into Eretz Yisrael. No one knows about the Chet HaMeraglim. No one knows is all the stuff that's going to happen at the back end of Bamidabar. They're about to go in. So they need to count to know how many they are. Moshe Amar, Nosim anachnu ala makom asher amar Hashem. As Moshe says in Bahaloscha to his father-in-law, we're about to go in. V'hayu Moshe v'hanisim tzrichim ladat mispar chalutzei tzava ha'milchama. They had to know how many were in each shevet. V'chein mispar kol shevet v'shevet u'ma yifkod olav barvot Moav b'ma'archot ha'milchama. They need to know how big the army would be, how many soldiers they have. Ki Torah lo tismoch al hanes. Another major theme in the Ramban. We think to ourselves often that God gave us Eretz Yisrael b'nes. And of course he did. It was miraculous. We fought wars and nobody died. But says the Ramban, we fought the war like it was a natural war. We fought the war like there was a fear that something might happen to us if we did something wrong. That's how we fought the war. What's the most miraculous war that the Jewish people ever participated in? So the answer is without a doubt Yericho. Right? We walked around 7 times, but the walls fell down. What happened when the walls fell down? All the people inside, they didn't, die of a cold or of cancer. We had to go in and stick them with the pointy edge of the sword. There is actually a fight that goes on. Yes, it's miraculous that God brought us to that point, and of course, Yericho was as good as done when the walls fell down. But the army still had to go in and fight the war. Va'od sheyichalek lahem haaretz lemisparam v'yeda kama chavalim yiplu lahem min haaretz hanichbeshet lahem ki lulei dvar hameraglim hayu nichnasim sham miyad. The other possibility is it wasn't the war; it's that Moshe Rabbeinu had to carve up Eretz Yisrael and give it to the Jewish people. So you need to know how many are in each shevet so that Moshe can make the nachala and give it out. Okay, and again the Ramban says because we're about to go in. Again, in Bahal Oscha, you could feel Moshe Rabbeinu's excitement when he tells his father-in-law, no sima nachla makom. We're going. After all this time, we're going. And the disappointment when it didn't happen. Okay? So the Ramban here deals with why God counts us. He loves us very much, and he's proud of us. And he's proud that we went from 70 to 2 million. He talks about the amazing opportunity every individual in Klal Yisrael, every male individual of Klal Yisrael had, to stand in front of Moshe and Aaron and to ask for a tefillah or to just relate to them. Like, what an amazing opportunity. And then finally, the need to know, because we're about to fight a war. And if we're about to fight a war, we have to know the number of people in our army, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not somei, ein somchim ala nes. We fight wars as if they're going to take place naturally, even though we're confident that God is going to help us. And finally, maybe we need to know how many are in each shevet for purposes of the nachalos. As the Ramban keeps saying, we are, as far as we know, about to go into Eretz Yisrael. And therefore, we have to prepare for that. Okay, last Ramban. You go to Perek Gimel. It's actually Perek Gimel, Pasuk Yudalet, where we're in the middle of counting again. And the Torah says, Vayidavei Hashem al Moshe b'mirai Seilei Mor, Pekod et b'nei Levi leveit avotam lemishpachotam, kol zachar ben chodesh v'mala tifkidem. We finally get to the separate count, right? Levi was not part of the 603,550. Levi needs to be counted separately. Okay? And the Ramban can't help but ask the question that all of us should ask. I'm skipping a few lines. Vihine. Lo hayu shevet halavim kishah shvatim. Wait, I'm looking at the numbers of the shvatim, and Levi doesn't compute. Kimi ben chodesh v'mala. Right, Levi is counted from every child who's 30 days and up. Most of the rest of the Shvatim were only counted from 20 years and up. So Kimi ben Chodesh V'mala lo hayu rak esrim u'shnaim elef. There were 22,000 members of Shevet Levi. Umi ben shloshim shana kulam shmonat alafim. And from 30 years and up, the age at which you actually go to work in the Beis HaMikdash, there are only 8,000. If that's the case, he says, V'hinei Lo yagiu mi ben esrim shana v'mala lechatzi shevet mi Yisrael hapachot shebekulam. If they had 8,000 from 30 and up, the Torah never gives us a number. But the Ramban says if we're nice to them and we make half of them be from 20 years and up, there'd be how many? I don't know, 10,000, 15,000 is a crazy big number. Says the Ramban, it's not even half of the next smallest shevet. Menashe, I think, was 39,000. Says the Ramban, how could that be that Levi is so small? They're not even half as big as the next shevet. Va'adayin lo nasu ha'aron I'm sorry, yeah. Va'adayin lo nasu ha'aron shetihi ha'kedusha mechale bahem. Many people say, many other Mefarshim say, the reason why Shevet Levi is so small is because they had a dangerous job. They had to carry the Aron, they had to deal with the Kalim, and if they did it wrong, they would die. That's a little depressing, but that's the fact. Says the Ramban, but right now, no one carried anything anyplace yet. How could they have died? V'zet tamiyah. It's a big wonder. Eichlo yihiyu avadav v'chasidav bruchei Hashem kishar kala'am. God's favorite shevet, the holiest of Am Yisrael. How could they be so few? Doesn't make sense. So Ramban says an amazing thing. He says, Va'ani choshev Shezeh chizuk l'ma shamu rabotenu. He thinks this is a proof to the thing that Chazal say. Ki shivto shel Levi lo hayu b'shibud melechet Mitzrayim uva'avodat parach. That the shevet of Levi, I'm sure all of you heard this medrash when you're a little kid or so, right? Levi didn't have to do avodas parach. They didn't have to do backbreaking work. They weren't slaves. They went free in Mitzrayim. That would explain how Moshe and Aaron came and went as they wanted. V'hinei Yisrael asher meireru hamitzrim et chayehem ba'avodah kasha. But the rest of the Jewish people, who the Egyptians afflicted with hard work, kidei lema'et. The point was they won't be able to reproduce because they're working so hard. Haya HaKadosh Baruch Hu marbe otam kineged gizerat Mitzrayim. That's a great shot. Kemo shene'emar v'cha'asher ya'anu kein yirbeh v'chein yifrot. Says the Ramban. It's an amazing thing. In response to the inui of Mitzrayim, to make it clear to Mitzrayim that they were not winning, they were mean to us and they tortured us and they afflicted us. And in response to that, in direct response to that, Bnei Yisrael multiplied in an unnatural way. They multiplied like rabbits, is the expression, right? It wasn't normal to have 6 or 7 kids at a time, but they did it. In response to, right? Vayimaru mitzrim et chayehem ba'avodah kasha. Ki lema'atam haya HaKadosh Baruch Hu marbe otam kineged gzerat Mitzrayim. God made Bnei Yisrael be so fruitful because Mitzrayim wanted it otherwise. And he wanted to show them that they weren't going to win. Kemo shama v'chashay anu oto kein yirbeh v'chein yifros. V'cha'asher nomar od b'gzerat im ben hu v'hamiten oto vayirev ha'am vayatzmu ma'od. Similarly, when they threw the Jewish babies, the Jewish boy babies, into the river, we just had more and more. Ki HaKadosh Baruch Hu hayom hayan nired davar mi yakum mimeni omehem. HaKadosh Baruch Hu looked at the Egyptians and he said, you're trying to keep the numbers down. I'm going to artificially raise the numbers. Okay? So that only works for the people who are being afflicted. But if Shevet Levi was not being afflicted, if they weren't really part of the Avdos of Mitzrayim, okay, they multiplied naturally. And here you really see the miracle. Shevet Levi multiplied naturally, and they had 8,000 above the age of 30, until 30 to 50. Okay. The rest of the Shvatim, who were afflicted, who were tortured, who were persecuted, they multiplied, at a rate that's almost phenomenal, right? The smallest shade was 39,000. I think Yehuda's the biggest one. It's like something like 79,000. These are massive numbers that came about pretty quickly, right? You can't reproduce that quickly naturally. And says the Ramban, when I look at the number of Shevet Levi, when I see how small the Shevet is, I think to myself, Chazal were right. Shevet Levi was not part of the Abdus, and so they weren't part of the bracha. They didn't multiply more slowly than ever. They multiplied naturally. And they got to 8,000 above. They got to 22,000, from 30 days and up. But the rest of Am Yisrael, who was afflicted that way, HaKadosh Baruch Hu fought for them, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, Mitzrim, you think that this is going to work? I'm going to show you the opposite. V'kachava, and we multiplied to be who we are. Okay? So if we just review the main point, Ohel Moed, the parallel to Har Sinai. It's important for the Torah to keep telling us that HaKadosh Baruch Hu spoke to Moshe Rabbeinu Ohel Moed, just like HaKadosh Baruch Hu spoke to Moshe Rabbeinu Har Sinai. Okay? Why does God count the Jewish people? Because He loves us so much. Right? He almost can't resist. And when something bad happens, He wants to see how many of us are remaining. Most importantly, we get to appear in front of Moshe and Aaron. We get to get a bracha from them. We get to feel like we are important parts of Klal Yisrael. And there is no such thing as just a number. And finally, why is Shevet Levi so small? The proof from the Medrash, or the proof to the Medrash, that they weren't really part of the Avdus in Mitzrayim. Okay, that's it for this week. Yashkach to everybody. Shabbat Shalom, Chag Sameach, and see you next week. Bye-bye.